This is the smear campaign survival guide. Now, narcissists are known for creating a smear campaign and doing everything that they can to damage your reputation, whether that's with the court, whether that's with family, friends, whatever it is. They often go on a mission, right? That they are going to smear your name no matter what it takes. And that can be very frustrating as the person on the receiving end. So I'm going to tell you how you need to handle this, because this is a trap that a lot of people fall into. Before we do, though, let me just remind you, if you like the content and find it helpful, don't forget to hit like on this video. Also, subscribe to the channel so that you get notified as new videos are released. As always, if you know somebody that's going through this, please feel free to share. It's definitely a challenge, especially when you have kids with a high conflict or narcissistic person. The number one thing that I can tell you to do, okay, I've got about 5 things, and there's one of them that's the hardest thing to do, and one of them that's the number one thing to do, and I'm going to start with that. The number one thing to do is to stay calm, to not react, okay? This is the bait they are trying to get you to take. Whether they're using a smear campaign tactic or any other tactic, the main thing they're trying to get from you is a reaction. Now, that reaction does a few things. Number one, it feeds their supply, right? They don't care if your attention is negative or positive. As long as they've got your attention, that's what they care about. And they know they're upsetting you, even better. Then they're enjoying that. And what happens is, as they're smearing your name and you're getting angry and upset, rightfully so, and defending yourself, then what happens is you sort of feed into this narrative that you're unstable, that you're crazy, that you're whatever. So we almost, confirm the accusation through our reaction. And I have seen several parents that end up losing custody in these types of situations in the first instance. And I shouldn't say losing, I should say being the one that has the lesser amount of custody a lot of the times, or you end up with a restraining order, which creates a problem in custody. And it all comes from you just overreacting to that other person. And again, not that you being upset isn't justified, not that your anger isn't justified. But unfortunately, the court really expects us to kind of put that up on a shelf and behave like an adult and ignore bad behavior. Now, I know that's not always easy to do, especially when they're damaging your reputation with people that you really care about. But here's the thing, I'll tell you. If somebody really cares about you and they know you, they aren't going to believe this person's lies. If you have people that believe this person's lies, then I will tell you that person never really had your back in the first place, and they're probably not somebody that you need in your life. So staying calm, not reacting, and not feeding into the narrative that they're trying to create of how difficult or crazy or whatever that you are. Number 2, you have to document everything. Now, I know you guys hear me talk about documentation a lot. You have to document everything with a high conflict person. I might say it again, everything. Okay. Here's the reason. Between now and the next time you go to court, whenever that is, that's 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, 3 years from now, whatever it is, everything that's happened since your last order and the next time you go to court really ends up being the thing that is under scrutiny. Okay. And when the narcissist is kind of flying by the seat of their pants because they're used to just kind of charming their way, talking their way through everything, the only way that you can start pulling that apart is if you have very detailed documentation of what happened and what didn't. Because here's what we know. We know that they take a kernel of truth and they spin it totally into something that it's not, right? And what happens is they say, oh, well, 6 months ago, this thing occurred. And you're like, 6 months ago? I don't even remember that. And then you pick up your phone and you start scrolling through messages, or you go to the parenting app and you start looking through messages and you're like, oh, yeah, I vaguely remember that. There was an exchange, or the details all kind of start to run together on all the different incidences. And then they're spinning this narrative, and you don't really have anything specific to be able to pull that narrative apart because you didn't know they were going to bring up this one random event from 6 months ago. You had no way of knowing that. So this is why it becomes so important. And I tell people, like, documenting is almost a full-time job. Like, you got to get systems down. You got to get things in place to enable you to just boom, boom, boom. But you need to write dates, times, locations, write a narrative of what happened. Just let your brain just spill it out onto the paper. It doesn't have to be pretty, doesn't have to be professional for this particular purpose. It just mostly has to trigger your memory and help you have a record of what actually transpired, okay? We don't want to put this into a parenting app. A lot of people do that. They try to document through a parenting app. That's the wrong approach. The court hates that. The court hates it. It inflames the other person, makes them harder to deal with. It tells the other person all your cards, tells them what you're tracking. You're sort of telegraphing your moves. Okay, when you're doing that, don't do that. Do it over in a separate, I recommend Excel is what I always tell people, but I don't care if it's a notebook, like whatever you got to do for your part of it, keep a separate record somewhere where you're noting everything as it's happening in date order, okay? Because then when they pull that random rabbit out of a hat 6 months, a year, 3 years down the road, whatever it is, you go, oh, let me just go back and look at my notes on this incident. Oh, look at all these notes I have. Oh, yeah, I remember this. I remember the details. And then it makes it easier for you to recall. And then usually you will have something in that detail that you can actually pull apart what they're saying because there's a fact that you have in there that you otherwise would not have remembered. Okay. So the documentation becomes really, really important. And it's important that you do it well. Again, I know it becomes almost a full-time job and it's tedious, but it's really the only way that you can trap them. The next thing I would do is put my kids in therapy. And this is like immediate. If you call me up and you say, I'm going through a custody issue, I'm going through a divorce, I'm going through get your kid in therapy. Okay. Now, if your kid's under 3, you probably can't do that. They're too little, right? But usually around 3, maybe 4 at the most, you will start finding play therapists that can work with children. And you'd be amazed at the things that come out in children's play. They mimic a lot of what they see adults do. I talked to 2 different clients just today who both have children that are right around 4 or 5 years old. And both of the children had things come out during play therapy that the therapist felt the need to discuss with the client. Okay. So it does start coming out like what's about the other parent. I'll just say that, like, because the person I'm working with is usually not the narcissist, right? So that's coming through in the children's play therapy. So it's very, very interesting. But that therapist is a third party that's not you. Okay, they're kind of like a neutral third party that doesn't have a dog in the fight. And so when push comes to shove, if you need to go to court or whatever happens, you've got somebody that is already seeing the child and also helping the child deal with everything that's happening in the other parent's world, right? Because when we're dealing with high conflict narcissistic people, a lot of times they're speaking negatively about us. They're putting the kids in the middle and talking to them about adult issues. Whatever the case may be, you want that therapist in place to help the children work through these types of issues. Okay, that's very, very important. And look, here's the first thing I'll tell you. Do not go into a new therapist and say, oh, we need you because we're in court and we need, no. As soon as you say court, that therapist is going to be like, I'm out. The idea is we want that therapist to help the child deal with everything that's happening. Now, if and when something happens at some point down the road where the therapist's testimony is needed for court, trust me, if that court subpoenas that therapist is going to show up, okay? Don't worry about that part of it. That will usually scare a therapist away when you say that. Really, our focus in the kids' therapy is really just to help the children deal with it. And then the side benefit is if you're being accused of different things or whatever, that gives you somebody that can, validate or give their opinion on, no, I don't think that parent's unsafe, or no, I don't think there's any abuse, or no, I don't think, whatever the case may be. So it's always helpful to have these third-party expert people that can, back you up on some of the issues that are going on. Number 4, you need to build legal and emotional support. I mean, I talk about this a lot. It's important that you have a good attorney and all of those things. Sometimes people can't afford attorneys and they're going at it alone. That happens. Sometimes people are like, you know what? I know more about my case and I'm going to handle it myself without an attorney. You certainly have the right to do that if you choose to. But I think it's important to have, even if you're going to do that, you need to have people you can reach out to. It's good to have a consulting attorney at least, that you can have somebody where you can call up and ask questions. And the judge said this today. And what does that mean? And, how do I file this thing, or what form do I need, or whatever the questions are that come up. It's good to have that person to reach out to and ask. Okay. And then the emotional support becomes just as important, because frankly, the emotional support is the part that most people let fall by the wayside. Some people get an attorney, they get very focused on the legal process, but they don't really focus on the narcissistic dynamic and the emotional process that's happening, and how to break that and how to put an end to some of the insanity that's happening. And, being in support groups, having coaching, having therapy, having your legal team, having all of those things rounds out your support to where you're not just getting help in one aspect of it, but we're taking a comprehensive approach to solving the problems in your situation. Okay. Because it's not purely a legal problem, and it's not purely an emotional problem, and it's not purely a narcissistic problem, right? It's a combination of all of those things. And so everything needs to work together in tandem in order to be able to solve the problems. This is the hardest one. I said there was one that was, the most important, which is stay calm. And I said there's one that's like the most difficult. That's this one. And that is trust that things are going to work out. Look, I know a lot of people get bad outcomes from the system. I know that the system doesn't always get it right the first time. It's a very overwhelmed, overworked system that really doesn't have the bandwidth to dig into the detail needed always to make, the right decision. But I do find that over time, the case will usually find its equilibrium. Like over time, the custody will usually be what it should be for the kids. But again, in the first instance, sometimes you end up with an emergency, a restraining order, a whatever. One parent isn't seeing the kid for a period, or we've got supervised visitation or something going on. But over the long haul, if you can do these things, remain calm, do your documentation, get your kids in therapy, all those things, and then trust that the system is going to eventually figure out what's going on. Because if you start kind of burning all the bridges with everybody in the system, be it the judges, the attorneys, the evaluators, whoever that is, then you're going to sabotage your own case. Okay, so you have to have some trust in the system and the fact that usually it does eventually get it right, although it takes some time. And having the patience in the interim to stay calm and wait for that to happen can be very, very challenging. So if you'd like support in doing that and accomplishing those kinds of goals, you can go to divorceuniversityonline.com/VIP-coaching. There's information on that page on my group coaching programs for moms and for dads. And there's also information on my premium VIP one-on-one coaching services. If you have a more complicated case or need a higher level of support, that would be the option for you. Okay. Thanks for joining me. I will see you guys next time.